Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Chat Cyber. We appreciate you all joining us. Very exciting episode for you guys today. Our boss, General Frank McKenzie, spent a little time with us to talk about Iran. And of course, since the recording of our time with General McKenzie, that topic has become even more so relevant. So we're really excited to be able to jump into that with the General today, and we really appreciate him spending a little bit of time with us. I'm going to pass it over for Jordan. For those of you that don't know, she's going to share a little bit about General McKenzie's very vast history and why he is one of the foremost voices in all the world to be able to speak on Iran. So, Jordan, if you could share a little bit about General McKenzie with us.
Absolutely. So General McKenzie graduated from the Citadel in 1979 and retired as the 14th Commander of U.S. Central Command in 2022, completing a 42-year career as a Marine. Prior to Central Command, he served as Director of the Joint Staff. General McKenzie is an honors graduate of the Armor Office Advanced Course, Marine Corps Command and Staff College, and the School of Advanced Warfighting. He is currently the Executive Director of the Global and National Security Institute, as well as the Florida Center for Cybersecurity at the University of South Florida.
Obviously, guys, we're all very fond of General McKenzie here, but aside from our affiliation with him, General McKenzie is an American hero, and we really appreciate him. With that, we're going to jump into the interview with General McKenzie.
Welcome to Chat Cyber, a podcast on all things cyber policy, where we explore key issues and discuss policy strategies with industry experts.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Chat Cyber. As we mentioned in the intro, we have former Commander of the United States Central Command, 4-star General Frank McKenzie, retired with us today. And most importantly, he's our boss, so we appreciate him taking some time with us today. General McKenzie, we're just going to jump straight into the questions, sir, if that's good for you.
That's great, and it's good to be here with you, James and Jordan.
Appreciate you, sir. So, General, you're an expert in Iran's history. Can you share a little bit about that history and how it informs many of the actions we see Iran taking today?
Sure. I think when you think about Iran, most Americans tend to date Iran to 1978-79, when they seized our embassy in Tehran, held a number of Marine guards and diplomats hostage for over 400 days. And people tend to think that's when our history with Iran began, and that's when Iran began as a state. In fact, our relationship with Iran is much older. In 1953-54, we participated in a coup that overthrew an elected prime minister and placed the Shah back on the peacock throne. So we have some history with Iran. Not all of it is necessarily positive and redounds to our good intentions. But Iran's history is actually one that goes back thousands of years. They're an imperial culture. They're not Arabs. They're a different culture. They're a Persian culture. They fought the Greeks, expanded to the west, and were turned back by the Greeks in a couple of very famous battles from history. But they've been around for a long time. They're not going to go away. And when we think about Iran, we need to remember that. I defer to nobody in distaste for the current leadership of Iran, but the fact of the matter is they're an old state. They're going to be around. They're probably going to be a regional power for a long time. And we just need to know and understand that as we try to find a way forward that protects our interests in the region and the interests of our friends and allies.
General, sir, can you expand a little bit on that idea of that cultural significance of their heritage, that imperial culture that they hold on to that's part of their identity? Can you share a little bit more how that fuels that ambition of what they're trying to achieve in modern history?
Sure. They see themselves as a regional power, a regional hegemon. They're probably going to remain a regional hegemon. They've actually, by mismanagement of their government, by mismanagement of their economy, by mismanagement of their foreign relations, the current leadership in Iran has actually depressed their ability to do those things. Nonetheless, the underlying strengths of the nation are pretty significant. They have vast oil reserves that they are not able to get to now because of incompetence and mismanagement. They have other resources that they could actually exploit if they could just, manage to find a way to do it in an efficient, intelligent manner. All of those things are actually been set aside for their pursuit of proxy wars against their friends and neighbors, proxy wars to import their Shia philosophy.
Can you give us some insight into Iran's use of asymmetric warfare or fighting through proxy groups and why this is part of their modern warfare strategy? And then the second part of that question is, how does this coincide with their missile program?
Sure. So let me put a little foundation underneath that first. We talked about 1978, 79, when the current regime came to power. It was a revolution. They see themselves as a revolutionary regime. The first task of a revolutionary regime is to survive, to pass it on to the next generation. The Iranians are smart. They've studied history of revolutions over the past many years, both in the East and in the West, and they know that it's very hard for a revolutionary generation to pass the virtues and values of the revolution on to succeeding generations. They're intent on doing that. That means protecting the current regime. It also means exporting the values of that regime to their neighbors. So, having said all that, the primary goal of Iranian statecraft is regime survival. They want to protect the current regime, and they will always default to that when confronted with problems, when confronted with pressure. And we need to remember that as we think about how we're going to deal with Iran. So Iran recognizes that they do not match up well against us in terms of conventional military power. Again, they're actually very intelligent. They know how to do what we would call the correlation of forces, to know and understand the way they stack up against us. But they know and believe that they can employ people acting for them who share their same Shia theology to act against us and against Israel and against other friends in the region as well. And that's what we mean by proxies. That's what we mean by proxy war. That is, in fact, Jordan, asymmetric warfare. The Iranians are very good practitioners of it. They export their theology, most significantly in Iraq, neighboring country. People often forget that Iraq and Iran fought a long, bloody, ugly war in the 1980s. Many, many people died in that war. Cities were attacked. Chemical weapons were used on a scale approaching that of the First World War. But we in the West, we don't tend to remember that. They remember that in the region. But Shia penetration of Iraq is significant. And Iran wants control. And so they want to control as much as they can of their neighbor. Iran wants control. They want to control as much of their neighbors as they can. They do that through these Shia groups that are there. They do it through the Shia groups in Yemen, the Houthis, who several years ago seized control. And we're in the middle of a pretty ugly dust up with right now over passage of commerce through the Bab el-Mandeb, which is in fact ultimately the Suez Canal. So Iran does all of these things. And that's sort of the asymmetric component of their program. The other thing that they've done, and is sort of not slipped under the radar, but sometimes in our focus on the nuclear program, we haven't been as alive to it as we should be, is their ballistic missile program. Over the last 15 years, Iranian ballistic missiles have dramatically increased in range and capability and accuracy and in number. And we saw this in the attack on our air base at Al-Assad in January 2020. Those missiles were very, very accurate. They had little effect because we were able to do some things to make their attack ineffective. But nonetheless, the missiles were very accurate. Now, recently in attacks against Israel, those missiles have been exposed a little bit. They've been exposed because Israel is a long way from Iran, while Iran has probably 4,000 or 5,000 rockets and missiles of different characteristics in its inventory. It probably has only about 1,000 that can reach Tel Aviv. And of those, they have to be put on launchers. They have a limited number of launchers. So their ability to put a large volley of missiles out is actually quite limited. In fact, their numbers in probably the 200 to 300 range, which is actually not going to overstress Israeli defenses. That's why we've seen in the two major Iranian attacks on Israel, ultimately lack of success with the Iranian ballistic missile capability. Now, that's a good thing, but we shouldn't draw too much goodness from that, because they still have the ability to attack their other neighbors. And by the other neighbors, I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, even Kuwait, with ballistic missiles of much shorter range that don't need the preparation for launch that the longer range missiles do. So they can gain a higher volley against these countries, and it would present much more of a significant threat. So as always, it's a complex problem. You've got to be careful drawing conclusions about what happened against Israel and applying it to should Iran attack their neighbors.
Thank you, General McKenzie. What are Iran's offensive cyber capabilities, and how would they use cyber attacks to advance or aid their kinetic goals?
So Iran has a very aggressive cyber policy. They're not great at it, but they're very energetic. They have trouble actually mastering misinformation, disinformation techniques because their command of English is not necessarily great. So when they dabble in the West, they're less effective. They are more effective in the region, as you would expect, although let's remember their language is Farsi, it's not Arabic. So again, there's some language barriers that are there. I would say this, Iran invests heavily in its cyber capabilities. They're okay, they're not great, but they're very energetic as they pursue those. And we would expect to see Iranian cyber attacks frequently, and we have seen Iranian cyber attacks frequently against Israel, occasionally against us, occasionally against other countries in the region. It's not something to be discounted. It's something to be watched carefully.
Third follow-up question on that, obviously I don't have your background, but I've had some conversations with other folks that have been in military leadership positions. And one of the things that they've told me that really struck me as a civilian, really helped me learn kind of about why our military capabilities are what they are. And it's all basically our logistical capabilities are so much superior to anybody else's. I know Iran's not the Chinese, they're not the Russians, they're not that advanced in their cyber attacks. But I've been given examples of specifically when it comes to our critical infrastructure, how cyber attacks there can delay the deployment or operationalization of military assets. Are the Iranians in any sense anywhere close to having those kind of capabilities to threaten our military logistical capabilities?
Well, I'll tell you, James, you should respect the capability. You never want to assume they can't do something to you. Our system is open. Our system is everything in the United States runs on some kind of internet backbone. So we are uniquely vulnerable. We are the most vulnerable nation in the world to cyber attack. Now, when we tend to think about cyber attack, we tend to think about the Russians, we tend to think about the Chinese, we tend to think about the North Koreans, and we tend to think about organized crime. Iran is a factor, and we should, and we do recognize that Iran's a factor. We do take steps to protect ourselves against them. The Department of Defense is probably better protected than other elements of the United States, but the fact of the matter is the Department of Defense needs the other elements of the government, both local and national, to be effective and to be able to perform if we're going to deploy our force forward. For example, the air traffic control network, the train control systems, ship control systems, harbor control systems, all of these things are to some degree vulnerable. They're probably more vulnerable to a sophisticated attack by the Russians or the Chinese, but I think we would be foolish to assume that the Iranians don't study this problem and aren't intent on throwing sand into the gearbox there if they can.
Yeah. So on that note, General McKenzie, what is the United States doing to deter and mitigate these cyber attacks? And I think you kind of mentioned that they're not, to your point, they're not totally advanced as the Chinese and the Russians, but we can't discard them. So what are we doing to deter and mitigate against cyber attacks?
Jordan, it's a sort of a hodgepodge effort. You've got agency efforts. The Department of Defense does a lot of work. I would argue that what we need and don't have is a more effective national policy on cyber. We do have national cyber standards. They're unequally applied. Here in Florida, I think we've done a pretty good job of looking at our weaknesses. As both of you know, the institution we're both affiliated with, these Florida Center for Cybersecurity and the University of South Florida, have been active in doing an overall assessment of Florida's critical vulnerabilities to cyber attack. And we're the only state in the union, I believe, that's actually done that at the state level. And that's important. But that means 49 other states have not actually undertaken that kind of effort. So you would like to see that in a more systematic way. You'd like to see also clear statements of what we will tolerate and what we will not tolerate in terms of actions in cyber. What, in fact, are our red lines? How will we respond if an attack in cyber occurs? Because the fact of the matter is, you're almost always going to be able ultimately to determine attribution, who did it. It may take you a little while, but if you put the resources of the National Security Agency on the problem, they're going to be able to figure that out. So we're going to know who did it, but what's the price we're going to cost people to pay? Are we going to respond only in cyber? Are we going to be prepared to respond in a non-cyber way? By that, I mean perhaps kinetically or economically or a number of other ways. Should we be attacked in the cyber domain? So I think we have a long way to go there. We talk about it a lot. We examine the problem a lot. But I am very concerned about our national vulnerability to cyber attacks.
Sir, you mentioned what we've done here at Cyber Florida through the state of Florida's support. Our last question for you is, what can the state of Florida do to protect critical infrastructure at large? And you answered some of that, the study we've done. But could you talk a little bit about some of the other resources the state has invested in Cyber Florida, and what any critical infrastructure organization, including private sector, what just general good practices they can engage in to protect themselves?
Sure, James. So that our critical infrastructure protection assessment is an ongoing thing. People can take that assessment either as a government organization or as a private sector organization. I would encourage people to take that. Take the assessment. It's private, it's confidential, and it's very helpful. It will identify best practices. It will identify potential weaknesses. And then, of course, you take the results of it. There are resources out there that allow you to seek training for both operator level and management level people who work in cyber. And of course, that's everybody in the state right now. If you're doing any kind of business in the state of Florida, you're working in the cyber domain. So we can help provide that training or direct you to institutions that can give you that training. For some organizations, particularly state, county government level organizations, municipalities, we offer a cyber range, which may not be known to a lot of people, but it's a place where you can go virtually. That is to say, you don't have to leave your desk, but you can take your systems, computers into this environment. They can be attacked. You can defend it. You can see what it's like actually to survive or to have a major cyber attack on your system. That's offered free of charge. The state of Florida is prepared to assist local municipalities. And again, particularly those counties that don't have the large resources of something like Hillsborough, Pasco, the counties that are around us here in the Tampa Bay region and in other densely populated areas of the state. There are areas of the state that don't have these resources. We offer an opportunity for those entities to reach out and get this kind of training.
Thank you, sir. We really appreciate you spending some time with us, sir. You know how much Jordan and I appreciate you. Thank you for your service to this nation. Thank you for what you do for Cyber Florida and for USF, and just really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I always enjoy doing it. Always enjoy talking to y'all, and look forward to doing it again in the future.
Thank you, sir. Guys, stay with us. We'll be right back for a couple messages from Jordan. Thank you.
Welcome to Cyber Florida's Shameless Plug with Jordan.
Cyber Florida, the University of South Florida, and the USF Bellini College of AI, Cybersecurity, and Computing are proud to be hosting the first ever Cyber Bay this October 2025. This inaugural event will be launching the bold initiative to invite the technology, academic, government, and military sectors to unite and flourish in a shared mission to drive Tampa Bay's evolution as the nation's leader in the convergence of cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and national security. Early bird tickets are on sale now through July 30th at cyberbay.org. I'm Jordan, that's my plug.
All opinions expressed by the Chat Cyber podcast participants are their own and do not exclusively represent the views and opinions of Cyber Florida.